Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Current Review. And my name is Kotsi. And you just saw my colleague, Thamsanqa, aka Mr. TT, was handling the ones and twos on the other side. And today I'll be talking to a very interesting gentleman, but we're talking something very serious that South Africa must pay attention to. We're talking about energy, electricity, there's been a recent development in the energy industry, whereby we saw that the license for the Koeberg nuclear power station, if you guys all know, the Koeberg nuclear power station is one of the nuclear power stations that we have in South Africa that is helping produce electricity. So the license has been extended up of geoscience in South Africa. And Doc, welcome to The Current Review.
Hi, Tebogo. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
No, I'm good, Doc. So tell me, just in brief, some people, they don't understand when we speak about nuclear and what nuclear actually does, because everybody knows, okay, majority of South Africans, we know for South African energy is generated from coal. But what is nuclear to us?
Yeah, so basically it's another form of energy where we actually use nuclear energy. So you use a source that is radioactive. And basically what happens is, as this material breaks down, to keep it very simple, it releases heat. So we find that, materials like uranium, as it breaks down, it releases heat, and you can actually use that heat to generate some electricity. So basically a nuclear power plant, instead of using coal, will use this type of radioactive source like uranium. And then as it breaks down, it produces heat, and you are able to use that heat to generate some electricity.
Interesting. So this plant, the Koeberg plant, how long has it been there? Like some people, they don't even know where is Koeberg, and we had nuclear power stations here in South Africa, because people have been knowing one thing: load shedding has been showing us flames at the end of the day.
Yeah. So the Koeberg power station is actually quite old. It was basically built between the 1970s, so late 1970s.
And okay, now I wanna know something very interesting here, because I'm going through my notes, and the license that has been extended till 2024, or what do you call this, the government, if I may put it that way, because now I see that the license has been extended till 2024. The significant step towards ensuring that South Africa has energy security and all that. So what does this mean for us?
Yeah, so basically, again, maybe just to try and simplify it, when the original power plant was built, they normally put let's call it a best before date, to simplify it. So the expectation was that maybe we only use the power plant for something like 40 years. And hence we see now, as we're coming to the end of the 40-year period, the license is now sort of expiring a bit. Now that is exclusively because when it was built, it was maybe designed or at least expected to operate for 40 years. That does not mean necessarily that it was built to only last for 40 years, but it was expected to last for sure. You buy a car, and at some stage you maybe buy a new car. It doesn't necessarily mean that the car cannot function anymore. It simply means that it's maybe time for an upgrade. So currently, where we are in our situation with the energy crisis, we find ourselves in a situation where we do actually want to maybe get the most out of and more energy out of these plants while we try to develop some newer energy. So this is basically what started the process. So a couple of years ago, of course, the license was coming to an end, and a process was then put forward to extend this license. And part of this extension implied that quite a number of research projects had to be done on the plant to now evaluate, can the plant actually be extended? Has anything changed in the surrounding areas? And this is ultimately what resulted in the extension of the current, the unit 1 generation capacity, as you've seen.
Interesting. Now, when you spoke about uranium, I know the dangers of uranium, especially when it comes to nuclear.
These type of studies. So with regard to the one that the Council for Geoscience did, we basically looked at the surrounding ground, the geology. So when the Kuba power station was originally built, there was the PSHA, so probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. That was now what we as the Council for Geoscience contributed to, and that was essentially to
we take pride in our environment and cleaner environment. And now with this extension of this license, how is it going to be aligned with the goals of transitioning into a cleaner and more suitable energy in the future?
Well, we actually find that nuclear is one of the cleaner energies. So you need to understand that, when we burn coal, for example, and to even some extent oil and gas, you produce these type of greenhouse gases. And that is just, typical because you have a biomass that is carbon-based. And once you burn it, that carbon usually combines with oxygen to form CO2. And we know that that's one of the biggest problems that we find with this global warming and climate change. Lots of quantities of CO2 being emitted. But with nuclear, you actually don't really release quite a lot of CO2. You're just producing heat, and you're producing these different types of waste materials associated to the uranium product that you're using. So actually, we find that nuclear energy is one of the cleanest fuels that you can produce that actually does not produce greenhouse gases that contributes towards climate change. So this actually aligns directly with our targets. So as a country, our plan is to reduce our CO2 emissions by at least half in the next 20 to 30 years. And we find that nuclear is one of the suitable options that can meet this target.
Then what happens to the waste materials from the nuclear generation? What do we do with them, if I may put it that way?
So the waste, we call it low-level waste. So this means that, and maybe we should also just mention this, just to also alert everybody. You normally have different kinds of nuclear fuels. So you mentioned earlier, for example, nuclear weapons. So we do not actually enrich any nuclear materials for nuclear weapons in South Africa. In fact, there's very strict laws around enriching nuclear material for nuclear weapons. So we do not do that. So that's what you call high level. So we actually produce very low level, which is only used as a fuel for nuclear energy. And again, that is also very, very regulated. In fact, we do not even produce it ourselves. We actually produce the raw uranium, and that is exported, and then it is produced into the fuel, and then we get the fuel back. So just to confirm that part. Now, once the fuel has been, let's say expanded, so you've now used all the uranium and you've produced energy, you do produce what we call low-level waste. So this is not necessarily dangerous per se, but what we do is we normally bury that. So you find another location, so very close to maybe the nuclear plant, another stable location, and you find a certain type of geology that would be suitable for keeping this type of waste. And that's normally what we try to do. So again, similarly, you want to find a place that is very stable, and you want to produce a certain volume that is not too much that you actually, let's say, degrade land, in terms of what land can be used for. So you find a nice piece of land that can't really be used for anything else. And then you normally bury this waste quite deep. And then what happens is that geology, it basically holds all that waste, and it can stay there for many hundreds to thousands of years.
But what happens if one of the waste, let's say they're stored in a bag or a ball of some sort, and then it happens that it cracks and it leaks onto the soil itself? What happens to that particular area? Would it be? Yeah.
So this is something that has to be avoided. So the plan in advance is that you find the right type of geology, number one. And in terms of the way that you encase the waste, you develop that in a way that is not possible. And, if this does happen, we normally find that we measure the area as well quite closely in terms of the volume of waste that we're putting in and the relative amount of radiation that might be coming out of there. And then there's also mechanisms in place to account for this. So what can possibly happen, let's assume now, worst case scenario, if you start to monitor that, there's actually the levels of radiation are increasing, then we are able to go in there very quickly and then close it off. And what you find is that normally it's very simple materials in terms of concrete that you use. to actually limit the movement of those type of radiations. So the first and most foremost thing is planning, where you plan your location very closely, and in terms of how you actually encompass this type of waste. So that is how you mitigate any possible scenario. But even then, in the worst case scenario, if something does happen, you have a monitoring process where you're able to monitor in real time any changes to what you expect to get. And if that happens, you have then these type of, let's say, actions that you can apply to quickly minimize that. And fortunately, I can say, as we mentioned, with nuclear that we have in South Africa, we've been able to generate from the Tebogo power plant for more than 40 years, and we have never had any problem so far. So that means that the processes that we as South Africa has put into place, they've been quite well. We've been able to mitigate any possible negative outcome.
But Doc, now that you are mentioning that, my biggest fear nowadays is that there's new developments, and you see all of a sudden there's a shift when it comes to plates, and there's earthquakes where we didn't expect them. We saw a couple of years back where there was a shift of plates in the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and we saw huge waves coming into Mozambique, example. So what happens if we have, let's say the rocks are being buried somewhere, let's say in the Northern Cape? It's quite a huge and a flat land. But we also know in the province, there's mining activities that are taking place, and anything can happen. Is there measures that the council or ESCOM themselves have taken to make sure for it, like you did mention, because some things can just slip out of the blue, Oh
yeah, no, absolutely. So fortunately, this is something that we are mandated to do, especially in terms of geology. So the Council for Geoscience is basically mandated to collect geological information across South Africa. And some of this includes what we call geohazards. So what we basically do is, you've described now that plates are moving, and it's possible that, these big waves can form. So we basically measure every single day in real time any movement that we see in terms of the plates, and how that is sort of, let's say, how it shows itself in terms of stress that we can measure. So as the Council for Geoscience, we have a network of what we call seismic devices that actually measure any movement. And we take that information and we look at that, how does that relate back to the geology in terms of where do we see these type of characteristics of the plates, and how this might affect, possible areas we want to develop. And I should also mention, it's not actually limited only to nuclear development. It's also developed or focused towards infrastructure development. Because you can imagine, if plates are moving, and if you can have, it can also affect normal infrastructure, people's houses and buildings and those kind of things. So what we do is we take this type of information, and we're able to use that in a way that we can guide policy. So we can say things like, here's an area where we seem to see evidence where you might have this type of, let's say, larger waves. You might have a case where there might be larger stress release. There might be some seismic activity. And we take that information to say that if we do choose to develop in these areas, you have to develop with this in mind, and it maybe means that you need some additional engineering considerations. So again, fortunately, we've been measuring this type of information. The Council for Geoscience has been around for more than 100 years. So we're fortunate enough to have more than 100 years of information, especially around the geology. And we try to use that to develop these type of policies. And again, I should also mention, when it comes to things like what you see now with the license being extended for Tebogo, that's a very meticulous and international process. So all of this information that we collect has to be peer reviewed internationally. So only once that is done, are they then satisfied to then say, okay, it's fine, the work was done and the license can be extended. So I think that's another important point to note, that we have to have this type of information, as you mentioned. And maybe what I can also share with you and for the viewers, all of that information, this geological information that we collect, we try to make it available. So we want to build confidence with the communities and the people. So you can actually have a look. You can log into our website, for example. We have a data portal where you can access some of these maps. If you're interested to know what is the rocks, beneath your feet or where you're living, you can actually access our portal, and you can have a look at these maps and have a look at the geology that we've started to characterize.
Doc, I think I wish I could continue, but time is not on my side. Definitely, I'm going to call you back for another edition because I feel that there's more information that we can exploit from you, especially when it comes to it. This is very interesting to know that South Africa, we do have a nuclear power plant. And I bet you most people didn't know for 40 years of existence. It's something that needs to be known and people need to be educated about such information because, hey, when load shedding hits, we're all stressing about one thing, but at least there's hope for now. That's what we can do. So, Doc, without wasting any time, thank you very much for reaching out and for the wonderful information that you just shared. And like you said, the information that is needed, it's on the website. Any WhatsApps, people are on WhatsApp. Is there WhatsApp line there on the website also if people want information?
Yeah, so what I would advise, everybody can go to this, basically, it's just geoscience.org.za, and from there they can actually access the portal and they can send information, even if they see the rocks, they can send photos of the rocks. We can assist with anything in terms of geology.
Nice. Nice. Doc, ladies and gentlemen, there's my good doctor. He's actually he's the minerals and manager at the Council of Minerals of Geoscience. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said to you, South Africa is quite a huge country and we've got a lot to learn. We shouldn't be narrow-minded to one segment. There's so many things to learn about geology. There's so many things to learn about energy. And this is a perfect platform. And I'm Tebogo Kotsi, and this is your current review. Don't go too far. My colleague Thamsanqa will be back with a 11 o'clock interview. And you'll be having a very interesting political talk with a couple of political parties coming through. Thank you, Doc. And